I want to take you back 30 years. I was 18 years old, fresh out of high school, full of big plans, and I thought I was about to start the life I had always dreamed of. My parents told me we were going on a family trip, what they called a little vacation, before I headed off to college. I packed a small suitcase, imagining beaches, or maybe some kind of retreat. I didn't realize that trip would end with the cruelest betrayal of my life. I'll never forget that day. The car ride felt strange from the beginning. My older brother, Daniel, was in the front passenger seat, smirking at me like he was in on some joke. My father, Martin, sat silently at the wheel, his hands gripping it a little too tightly. And my mother, Linda, well, she kept glancing back at me with that look I knew all too well. The look that said, "You don't need to ask questions. I know what's best for you." I tried to lighten the mood. "So, where are we going?" "Florida? The mountains?" Daniel chuckled. "You'll see, little brother." I pressed again. "Come on, at least give me a hint." Mom's voice was firm but sweet, like it always was when she wanted to control the conversation. "Just relax, Ethan." It's a surprise, That word stuck in my head. After about an hour, the car slowed down. I looked out the window expecting to see a lake or maybe a cozy cabin. Instead, I saw a tall brick building with faded white letters across the front. Green Pines Nursing Home. At first, I thought we were stopping for something, maybe visiting someone, maybe just a quick errand. But when my father turned off the engine and my mother said, "We're here," something cold swept over me. My heart started pounding. "What do you mean we're here?" I asked. Mom didn't answer right away. She just opened her door and stepped out, motioning for me to grab my suitcase. My father avoided my eyes completely. Daniel smirked again, but this time it didn't feel playful. It felt cruel. I got out of the car, clutching my bag, confusion swirling in my chest. We walked up the concrete steps, and I saw the sliding glass doors open. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, like hospitals do. Inside, a nurse was waiting. "Welcome, Ethan," she said with a forced smile. I froze. How did she know my name? Mom gently touched my arm. "You'll be staying here for a little while. It'll be good for you." Her words didn't make sense. "Staying here? What do you mean? This is a nursing home." Dad's voice was low, tired, like he'd rehearsed it. "It's just temporary. Think of it as a vacation." I laughed nervously, waiting for someone to tell me they were joking. But no one did. The nurse was already reaching for my suitcase. I pulled it back. No, this doesn't make any sense. I'm 18. Why would I stay in a nursing home?" Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and muttered, "Don't make it harder than it needs to be." I looked at my mom. "Mom, please, tell me the truth. What is this?" Her face was stone. "You'll be safe here, Ethan. You need discipline. You need structure. Just trust me. Safe. Discipline? Structure?" None of it explained why my family was abandoning me. The nurse placed a hand on my shoulder, gently guiding me toward a hallway. My legs felt like they were sinking into the floor. I turned back to see my parents walking away, already halfway to the exit. "Wait, don't leave me here," I shouted. For a brief second, my father glanced back, but the moment our eyes met, he looked away. My mother didn't even turn around. Daniel gave me one last look, shrugged, and followed them out the door. The sound of the sliding doors closing behind them was like a prison gate slamming shut. I dropped my suitcase and felt tears burning in my eyes. That was the day my vacation began. A vacation that turned into 6 months of crying in a small, windowless room, wondering why the people I trusted most had abandoned me. And if you think that was the end of the story, it wasn't. Because 30 years later, I came back to this very building. Not as a scared teenager, but as a man who finally had the power to change everything. I bought it, I rebuilt it, and I gave it a new name, not a vacation. Before that day, before the car ride that ended in betrayal, my life was far from perfect. but it was mine. I was 18 years old, standing on the edge of adulthood, and I thought I was about to step into freedom. My name is Ethan Cole, and back then I had one dream: music. Music was the only thing that made sense to me. While other kids were obsessed with football or cars, I sat for hours at an old upright piano my grandfather gave me, teaching myself notes, chords, and melodies. Grandpa Henry was the only one who believed in me. He used to sit in the living room, listening with his eyes closed, smiling like my music could heal him. "You've got something in you, Ethan," he'd say, patting my shoulder. "Don't let anyone lock it away." But not everyone in my family saw it that way. My mother, Linda, was a woman who lived by rules, her rules. She believed in order, in appearances, in controlling every outcome. To her, my music was a distraction. A hobby, she called it. She wanted me to study law, or maybe business, something respectable. "Ethan," she told me one evening over dinner, "music won't pay your bills. It won't build a future. You're too smart to waste your life chasing dreams that don't matter." I remember gripping my fork so tightly my knuckles turned white. "It matters to me, Mom. Isn't that enough?" She shook her head with that finality that always ended arguments. "One day you'll thank me for pushing you in the right direction." Then there was my father, Martin. He was quieter than my mom, but in some ways, his silence hurt more. He never defended me. He never contradicted her. He'd just sit there at the table, staring at his plate, chewing slowly, letting her words hang in the air like a verdict. My older brother, Daniel, was already in college by then. He'd taken the path my parents wanted: business major, internships lined up, already talking about starting his own company one day. He liked to tease me, sometimes cruelly, about my music. "Ethan's gonna be the next Beethoven," he'd laugh. Too bad Beethoven didn't have to pay rent. I'd roll my eyes, but deep down, his words cut me. The only person who gave me hope in that house was Grandpa Henry. He was my dad's father, and he lived with us after Grandma passed. He wasn't loud or forceful, but he had a way of making you feel seen. He'd listen when I talked about music schools, when I confessed my fears about disappointing Mom, when I admitted I didn't want to live a life that felt like someone else's plan. "You've got to hold on to yourself, Ethan," he said one night while we sat on the porch. "The world will try to strip it away, but you can't let them." I nodded, wishing I had his strength. Despite the pressure, I was excited about what was ahead. College was just months away. I'd been accepted to a local program that offered music courses alongside general studies. It wasn't Juilliard, but it was a start. I imagined myself finally free from my mother's constant criticism, able to play piano late into the night without her telling me to stop wasting time. But even with that excitement, there was always tension in the air at home. At dinner, conversations felt like interrogations. At family gatherings, I felt like a shadow compared to Daniel, who could do no wrong. I didn't realize it then, but my mother wasn't preparing to let me grow up. She was preparing to control my future in her own way. Looking back, there were signs. Small comments that didn't make sense at the time, like the evening she said, "You'll thank me one day when you realize what's good for you." Or the way my father said, "Just do what your mother says, Ethan. It'll make things easier." At the time, I brushed it off. I thought they were just being overbearing, like any parents. I thought my biggest fight would be convincing them to let me major in music. I didn't know that they were planning something much darker, something that would break my trust in them completely. The night before the so-called vacation, my mother came into my room while I was packing clothes for what I thought was a beach trip. She stood in the doorway, watching me fold my shirts. "You'll see, Ethan," she said softly. "This is for your own good." I smiled, clueless, and asked, "Where are we going?" She only smiled back, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Somewhere safe." Safe. I thought she meant fun, relaxing, a place where I could finally breathe before college. Instead, it meant confinement. It meant betrayal. If I'd listened closer to her tone that night, maybe I would have realized. But I didn't. I was 18, naive, and hopeful. I couldn't imagine that my own family was about to trade my freedom for control. That was the calm before the storm, the last time I believed my family had my best interests at heart. The moment the sliding doors closed behind my family, I felt my chest collapse. The nurse led me down a long hallway lined with beige walls and dim lights. The air smelled faintly of bleach, mixed with something heavier, like sadness. "Here's your room," she said softly, as if her gentleness could soften the blow. I stepped inside. A narrow bed with stiff white sheets sat against one wall. A dresser, a chair, and a window with blinds half closed completed the space. The room was meant for someone at the end of their life, not for an 18-year-old who still dreamed of beginning his. I dropped my suitcase and stared at the bed. My mind screamed, "This has to be a mistake." But it wasn't. That night I lay awake, waiting for my parents to come back. I convinced myself they'd explain everything, that this was some kind of mix-up. But the hours dragged on, and no one came. By midnight, the truth sank in. I had been abandoned. The first days were the hardest. I refused to eat in the cafeteria, ashamed to sit among strangers old enough to be my grandparents. They'd shuffle past me in wheelchairs, or hobble slowly with walkers, their eyes dim, their voices raspy. Some would smile at me, others just stared in confusion. "Why is there a kid here?" one old man whispered to a nurse as I passed. I wanted to shout the same thing. Why is there a kid here? Why am I here? When I finally sat in the cafeteria, I kept my head down, poking at tasteless food on a plastic tray. I felt like a prisoner serving a sentence for a crime I hadn't committed. Nights were the worst. The hallways echoed with coughs, groans, and the distant sound of someone crying out in their sleep. I pressed my pillow against my ears, but I couldn't block out the sounds. More than once, I cried quietly into that pillow, terrified someone would hear me. I wrote letters to my family, long letters, begging them to come back for me, telling them I'd be better, that I'd follow their rules, that I'd give up music if that's what they wanted. I slipped those letters into the outgoing mail slot at the front desk. Weeks passed. Not a single reply came back. Each unanswered letter was another knife in my chest. One afternoon, about a month in, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, my heart almost leapt out of my chest. Grandpa Henry stood there, his weathered face soft with worry. "Grandpa?" I whispered, afraid if I spoke too loudly, he'd vanish. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His eyes watered when he saw the sterile room, the unmade bed, the stack of unanswered letters on my desk. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," he said, his voice breaking. "This wasn't my choice. If I had the power, I'd have taken you with me." I hugged him like I'd never let go. He slipped a small folded note into my hand. "Read this when you feel like you can't hold on anymore." The nurse knocked after only 10 minutes. Visiting hours were strict. Grandpa squeezed my hand, whispered, "This isn't forever, Ethan. Hold on." And then he was gone. For the rest of the 6 months, that note was my anchor. Whenever the walls felt like they were closing in, whenever I wanted to give up, I unfolded it and read those words over and over. This isn't forever. Hold on. Still, the days stretched endlessly. I watched residents pass away, their rooms emptied and refilled. I helped some of them play checkers or just listened when they needed someone younger to hear their stories. In a strange way, I became a companion for people who had no one else. And yet, I couldn't escape the bitterness eating me alive. I was 18. I was supposed to be in a dorm room, surrounded by friends, making music, laughing about the future. Instead, I was trapped in a place where every clock ticked slower, where hope felt like a luxury. By the time 6 months finally ended, I wasn't the same boy who had walked in. When my parents showed up again, casually, like they were picking me up from summer camp, I couldn't even look them in the eyes. They told me it was for the best, that I'd learned responsibility. My mother said, "One day you'll thank me." But in that moment, all I felt was betrayal. Something inside me had broken. I swore to myself, standing in that parking lot with my suitcase, that I would never forget what they did to me. And I promised myself one more thing. I would never let anyone else feel the same kind of abandonment I had felt in that room. That promise stayed buried for decades, waiting for the right moment to come alive. Walking out of Green Pines after 6 months felt like being released from a cage, but freedom didn't feel sweet, it felt hollow. My parents greeted me in the parking lot as though nothing unusual had happened. My mother straightened my collar and said, "See? You're stronger now." My father loaded my suitcase into the car without meeting my eyes. Daniel leaned against the door, arms crossed, smirking as if I had simply completed some rite of passage. But inside me, something had changed. They thought they had broken me, but they had done the opposite. They had lit a fire. For years, I carried that pain like an invisible scar. At first, it was anger. Anger at my mother for her cold logic, at my father for his silence, at my brother for his mockery. I wanted to prove them wrong, to show them I was more than the fragile boy they locked away. So I worked, harder than I ever thought I could. I took jobs no one else wanted. Cleaning offices, loading trucks, working late-night shifts at diners. Every paycheck was a small piece of my freedom. Every dollar saved was proof that I didn't need them. And when the workday ended, I turned back to the one thing that gave me life: music. I played every night, sometimes on borrowed pianos, sometimes in bars that paid me in free food instead of cash. My fingers bled against the keys, but I didn't care. With every note, I was reclaiming the voice they had tried to silence. Grandpa Henry never stopped checking in. He came to gigs when he could, sitting in the back with a proud smile. Afterward, he'd grip my hand and whisper, "I told you, Ethan. You've got something in you. Don't let the world lock it away." His encouragement was like oxygen, keeping me alive when bitterness threatened to suffocate me. Years passed. Slowly, I built a career, not glamorous, not headline-worthy, but steady. I taught piano lessons, I played at weddings, small clubs, even at community centers for kids who couldn't afford lessons. Each performance was a reminder that my music mattered, even if only to a few people at a time. By the time I was in my 40s, I had built stability. I bought a modest home, I paid off debts, and most importantly, I had peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. Then, one afternoon, everything shifted. I was driving through my old hometown, a place I avoided for decades. My hands tightened on the wheel as I passed familiar streets, each one carrying echoes of the boy I once was. And then I saw it. Green Pines. The nursing home stood abandoned, its windows boarded, its sign faded, the once polished lawn overrun with weeds. The sight stopped me cold. Memories came rushing back, the sterile smell, the endless nights, the sound of the sliding doors closing as my family walked away. I pulled over and sat there for a long time, staring at the building. Part of me wanted to drive away, to never look back. But another part, the stronger part, whispered, "This is your chance." For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I looked up records, searched for who owned it now, discovered it had been shut down years earlier due to neglect. The property was up for sale, sitting unwanted, forgotten. Just like I had been. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the voices of my past. My mother saying, "This is for your own good." My father saying, "Just do what your mother says." My brother sneering, "Don't make it harder than it needs to be." And then, cutting through all of it, Grandpa Henry's voice, "This isn't forever." Hold on, I realized I had held on. I had survived. And now I had the chance to take the very place that symbolized my lowest point and turn it into something no one could have imagined. The next morning, I called the realtor. When I signed the papers weeks later, my hands shook, not from fear, but from power. The building that once trapped me now belonged to me. I walked through its empty halls, dust rising from the floor, paint peeling from the walls, and I placed my hand against one of the cold doors. "I'm back," I whispered, "but not as your victim. Not anymore." It wasn't just a purchase. It was a reclamation, a promise I had made to my 18-year-old self, and to every person who had ever felt abandoned, that I would make this place mean something different. This time, Green Pines wouldn't be a prison, it would be a sanctuary, and I already knew what I would call it: not a vacation. The day I received the keys to Green Pines, the air felt heavy with ghosts. I stood outside the rusted gate, staring at the building that had once stolen 6 months of my youth. The paint was chipped, the roof sagged, and weeds climbed up the walls like chains. For a moment, I could almost hear the echoes of my younger self crying in that windowless room. But this time, I wasn't walking in as a broken boy. I was walking in as the owner. The first time I stepped back into those halls, the memories hit me like a tidal wave. The smell of disinfectant, the clatter of wheelchairs, the silence of nights when I cried myself to sleep. My knees buckled under the weight of it. But then I reminded myself, this was no longer a prison. This was my chance to rewrite the story. Renovation began the next week. Walls were stripped, floors replaced, light poured in through newly opened windows. Volunteers from the community showed up, some who had known the old Green Pines, others who simply believed in the vision. I told them, this place once crushed me. Now I wanted to heal others. Every hammer strike, every brush of paint, every laugh that echoed through those halls during the renovation was like stitching a wound that had never fully closed. Where there had once been isolation, we installed wide-open community rooms. Where the beds had been stiff and cold, we brought in soft mattresses and blankets in warm colors. Where the cafeteria had been gray and lifeless, we built a dining hall filled with natural light and plants. I remember one evening, standing in the lobby after a long day of work, running my hands along the newly sanded banisters. For the first time, I felt proud. Not of surviving, but of transforming. Months later, when the building was finally ready, I had a sign placed above the front doors. In bold, clear letters, it read, "Not a vacation." The night before the grand opening, I barely slept. I kept picturing the faces of the people who would walk through those doors. People who, like me, might have nowhere else to go. People who had been forgotten or abandoned. This time, the building would not be a place of despair. It would be a refuge. On opening day, the sun shone bright against the fresh coat of paint. Guests began arriving slowly. Elderly men and women carrying worn suitcases, some with canes, some in wheelchairs. Their eyes carried the same fear I had felt 30 years ago, the fear of being left behind. I greeted each one at the door, shaking their hands, hugging them, looking them in the eye. "You're not alone anymore," I told them. "This is your home." When everyone had gathered in the new community room, I stood at the front, my throat tight with emotion. Behind me, the banner hung proudly. Not a vacation. I took a deep breath and began. 30 years ago, I stood in this very building as an 18-year-old boy. My parents told me it was a vacation, but it wasn't. It was abandonment. I cried in these rooms for 6 months, believing no one cared. That pain never left me. But today, I stand here not as a victim, but as someone who believes we can turn pain into purpose. I paused, scanning the faces in front of me. Some were already crying. Others leaned forward, gripping every word. I bought this building because I wanted to take back what was stolen from me. But more than that, I wanted to give you what I never had: dignity, warmth, community. No one here will ever be treated like a burden. No one here will ever be told they've been left behind. This is not a vacation. This is home. The room erupted in applause. Some residents reached out for my hand, some hugged each other. A woman in her 70s clutched my arm and whispered through tears, "Thank you." I thought I'd be forgotten. In that moment, the weight I'd carried for 3 decades finally lifted. Later that evening, as the residents shared their first meal together in the bright new dining hall, I sat quietly at the piano we had placed in the corner. My fingers touched the keys, releasing a melody that filled the room. Conversations hushed. One by one, people turned toward me, listening. It was the same piano song I had written at 18, the one I used to play alone at night when I felt invisible. Now, for the first time, it wasn't just mine, it belonged to all of us. As the last note lingered, I looked around the room, at the smiles, the tears, the light in eyes that had once been dim, and I thought, this is what healing looks like. The building that had once been my cage was now a sanctuary. The same walls that had witnessed my pain now echoed with laughter and music. And for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't crying out of sorrow. I was crying out of gratitude. The night after the grand opening, when the last of the volunteers had gone home and the residents were tucked into their new rooms, I walked the quiet halls alone. The building was alive again, but this time not with despair. I could hear the faint sound of laughter drifting from a room where 2 residents had stayed up playing cards. Down another hallway, soft music hummed from a small radio. The air felt lighter, warmer. I stopped outside the very room where I had spent those 6 long months 30 years ago. The number on the door was different now, but I knew it instantly. I pushed it open and stepped inside. It looked nothing like the cell I remembered. The bed was soft, covered with colorful quilts donated by local churches. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the windowsill, and sunlight poured in through wide-open blinds. It smelled of lavender instead of bleach. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the contrast sink in. The boy who had once sobbed in the dark here was gone. In his place stood a man who had transformed that pain into purpose. I sat on the bed and reached into my pocket. Carefully, I unfolded a small, fragile piece of paper, Grandpa Henry's note. I had carried it with me all these years. The ink was faded, but the words still burned. This isn't forever. Hold on, I placed the note in a frame and hung it on the wall above the bed. This way, every person who stayed in this room would see it. Maybe, in their own quiet struggles, they would hear the same encouragement that had once kept me alive. Over the weeks, the residents began to settle in. They started calling each other family. Meals were shared like celebrations. Birthdays were remembered. Stories were told. Songs were sung. Some days, I'd find myself sitting at the piano while the residents gathered around, clapping and singing along to old tunes. I could see the spark in their eyes, the spark of being valued, of being loved. One afternoon, a man named Walter, who had been silent since the day he arrived, approached me after I played. He was in his 80s, thin, with a voice that cracked like brittle wood. He said, "I thought I'd die alone. But you gave me a home. You gave me hope." Then he hugged me, and for a moment I felt like that 18-year-old boy inside me had finally healed. I realized then that Not a Vacation wasn't just a name. It was a declaration. It was me shouting into the world that pain doesn't get the last word, that betrayal doesn't have to define us, that the places meant to break us can become the places that save others. Sometimes I still think about my parents. My mother, Linda, never apologized. My father, Martin, passed away years ago. Daniel went on to live his life, building his businesses, raising his family. I don't know if they ever think about what they did to me. For a long time, I thought forgiveness meant pretending it never happened. But I've learned forgiveness is different. It's choosing not to let their choices poison the rest of my life. And so, when people ask me if I've forgiven them, I say yes. Not for them, but for me. Because if I hadn't, I could never have built this place. The lesson I want people to take from my story isn't just about survival, it's about transformation. We all carry wounds. Some are visible, most are not. But those wounds can either chain us to the past or drive us toward a future we never imagined. The choice is ours. As I walk these halls now, I see proof that the choice I made was the right one. Every laugh I hear, every smile I see, every life touched by not a vacation tells me that the 18-year-old boy who once wept here didn't suffer in vain. The final scene I want to leave you with is this, me, sitting at the piano in the main hall, playing softly as the residents gather around. Some clap, some hum along, others simply close their eyes and let the music wash over them. Behind me, hanging on the wall, is Grandpa Henry's note, framed for everyone to see. This isn't forever. Hold on. And as I look around, I whisper to myself, "You were right, Grandpa." I held on. And because of that, they don't have to cry in these rooms like I once did. That's the legacy of Not a Vacation. It isn't just a building. It's proof that even the deepest pain can become a foundation for hope. And if you're watching this, if you're going through something that feels unbearable, I want you to hear what I heard 30 years ago. This isn't forever. Hold on. That's my story. 30 years ago, I was abandoned in this building. Today, it stands as a home filled with love and dignity, not sorrow. I named it Not a Vacation because I wanted to turn pain into hope, not just for me, but for everyone who walks through these doors. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own life or someone you love, I'd be grateful if you could like this video. It helps share this message with more people who might need it. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever taken something painful and turned it into something meaningful? Your story might inspire someone else who's struggling right now. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about resilience, healing, and hope, please subscribe to the channel and join this community. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, this isn't forever. Hold on.